Today, I'm going to tell you the story of Lieutenant James Conner, a World War II veteran who made a promise on a battlefield in Germany to deliver his dying friend's final words to a family he'd never met. What should have been a simple journey across America became something that would change his life forever. But no one expected what would happen when he reached that small mountain town. Please subscribe to our channel and comment where you're listening for the promise. The rain had finally stopped, but mud still clung to everything. Lieutenant James Conner wiped it from his face for what felt like the 100th time that day, his fingers leaving clean streaks through the grime. April 1945, Germany was collapsing. Hitler's 1,000-year Reich reduced to desperate. The dying continued. "Lieutenant," a voice called behind him. "We found another one." James turned to see Private Reynolds pointing toward a small copse of trees beyond their makeshift field house, a collection of olive-drab tents set up in what had once been a farmer's field. Another wounded soldier crawled away to die alone. American? James, already knowing the Germans didn't crawl away, they fought to the last. "Yes, sir, still alive, but just barely." James nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. "I'll come." He followed Reynolds across the muddy field, their boots sucking such step. The war was supposed to be nearly over. The newspapers back home were already printing victory headlines. But here, in this forgotten corner of Germany, men were still dying. The soldier lay curled on his side beneath a small stand of trees, his uniform dark with blood. As James knelt beside him, he recognized the face beneath the mud and dried blood. "Matthew," he said softly. "David Matthew." The man's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on his face. "Lieutenant," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Knew you'd find me." James looked over his shoulder at Reynolds. "Get the medic, now." Reynolds hesitated. "Sir, he's—" "Now, Private." James's tone left no room for argument. As Reynolds hurried away, James turned back to Matthew. "Hang on, Dave. We'll get you patched up." Matthews shook his head slightly, a small, knowing smile touching his cracked lips. "No time for lies, LT. We both know I'm not making it off this field." James wanted to protest, to offer some comforting falsehood, but the wound in Matthews's abdomen told its own truth. The blood was too dark, too profuse, internal bleeding, nothing their field medic could fix. "What happened?" James asked instead, taking Matthews's hand. "Patrol ran into a machine gun nest. Others didn't make it." Matthews's breath came in short, painful gasps. "Got the bastard." "I'm sure you did." James squeezed his hand. "You always were a stubborn son of a bitch." Matthews coughed, flecks of blood appearing on his lips. "Need you to do something for me, Lieutenant. Anything." Inside pocket, letters, picture. Matthews's free hand moved weakly toward his jacket. James carefully reached into the blood-soaked pocket and removed a small packet wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were several letters, a few photographs, and a silver pocket. "Need you to take them." Matthew's voice grew fainter. "Home. My family. Tell them I wasn't afraid." "I will," James promised, tucking the items securely into his own jacket. "But you can tell them yourself when we get back." Matthews's laugh turned into another coughing. Always a terrible liar. His grip on James's hand tightened suddenly. "Promise me. Pine Ridge, Kentucky. My mother, my sister Carolyn, my wife Grace, my boy Danny. He's only 5, won't remember me." "He'll remember," James said fiercely. "I'll make sure of it." "You promise?" Matthews's eyes locked onto his with unexpected intensity. "I promise," James replied solemnly. "I'll find them. I'll tell them how you saved us all at Bastogne, how you carried Reynolds for 3 miles when he was wounded. Everything." Matthews seemed to relax, his grip loosening slightly. "Knew I could count on you, LT." They sat in silence for a moment. The sounds of the war, distant artillery, the rumble of tanks, the calls of men, creating a grim backdrop to their private farewell. "Remember that creek behind my house?" Matthews asked suddenly, his voice dreamy. "Used to catch trout there with my daddy. Water so clear you could see straight to the bottom." "It sounds beautiful," though Matthews had never mentioned it before. "It is, you'll see." Matthews' eyes drifted toward the gray sky. "Funny, we'll smell the pine trees." When Reynolds returned with the medic a few minutes later, David Matthews was gone, his unseeing eyes fixed on some distant point, perhaps a creek in Kentucky where the water ran clear as crystal. The medic checked for a pulse, then shook his head. "Too late." "I know," said quietly, gently closing Matt. He knew, too. They buried him there, beneath the trees with his dog tags hanging from the simple wooden. James marked the location carefully on his map, though he doubted Matthews's family would ever be able to visit this distant spot. That night, alone in his tent, James examined the contents of the oilcloth carefully. 3 letters, each addressed in Matthews's neat handwriting, one to his mother, one to his sister, one to his wife and son together. The photograph showed a pretty, dark-haired woman holding a small boy on her lap, an older woman with Matthews's same direct gaze, a young woman, presumably Carolyn, standing by a white clapboard house. The pocket watch was silver, engraved with the words, "To David, may you always find your way home. Love, Grace." Inside the case was another tiny photograph, this one of Matthews himself in his uniform, smiling confidently before the war had etched its hardships into his face. James carefully rewrapped everything and tucked it into his footlocker. The war was winding down. Soon they'd all be going home, and when he did, he had a promise. A week later, Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. 2 weeks after that, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war in Europe was over. As his unit prepared for either occupation duty or redeployment to the Pacific, James received his own unexpected orders: honorable discharge due to a shrapnel wound that had never quite healed properly, leaving him with a permanent limp and occasional pain that shot through his left leg. By July, he was on a transport ship bound for New York, Matthews's effects still safely in his possession. The Pacific War ended during his crossing, Japan surrendering after the atomic bombs devastated Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world had changed, and James Conner, stepping onto American soil for the first time in 3 years, had a promise to fulfill before he could truly come home. The journey. The Greyhound bus rattled along the winding mountain road, its metal frame protesting each sharp turn. James Conner pressed his forehead against the cool glass of the window, watching as the lush September landscape of eastern Kentucky rolled past. The Appalachian foothills rose in gentle waves at first, then more dramatically as they ventured deeper to coal country. 3 days of travel had left him from New York to Pittsburgh, then south through Ohio and into Kentucky, each mile bringing him closer to a family he'd never met, and a promise he wasn't sure how to fulfill. The oilskin packet containing Matthews's letters and pocket watch sat heavy in his inside jacket pocket, a constant reminder of his purpose. "Pine Ridge, next stop," the driver called out, his voice cutting through James's thought. The bus began to slow as it approached a small settlement nestled in a narrow. Pine Ridge wasn't much, a single main street with a handful of stores, a white church steeple rising above the trees, scattered houses climbing the gentle slopes of the surrounding hills. It looked like 100 other small towns James had passed through during the war, except this one was home. When the bus stopped in front of a weathered general store, James gathered his single duffel bag and stepped down onto Kentucky. The air smelled of pine resin and wood smoke, with an underlying hint of coal dust. A group of old men seated on the store's porch watched him curiously as he adjusted his civilian clothes, still unfamiliar after years in uniform. "You visiting, son?" one of them, chewing thoughtful on a toothpick. "Looking for the Matthews family," James replied, approaching the porch. "David Matthews's people." The men exchanged glances, their expressions shifting from curiosity to something more somber. "You served with Davy?" Rising slowly from his chair. "Yes, sir. Lieutenant James Conner, 28th Infantry Division." The old man extended a weathered hand. "Roy Tanner, Davy's uncle, on his mother's side." His grip was surprisingly strong. "We got the telegram back in April. Killed in action in Germany." James nodded. "I was with him at the end. He asked me to bring some things to his family." A heavy silence fell over the porch. Finally, Roy gestured up the road that led out of town and into the hill. "Martha's place is about 3 miles up that. Grace and the boy live there too, since Davy shipped out." He paused. "You eaten yet, Lieutenant?" "Not since breakfast." Roy turned and called through the open door of the store. "Caroline, got someone here you should." A young woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands. The family resemblance was immediate. She had Matthew, the same direct, unflinching. "This here's Lieutenant Conner. Served with your brother." Carolyn Matthews froze. then quickly composed her. "You'd best come in. I was just about to close up for lunch anyway." The interior of the store was cool and dim, shelves stocked with the essentials of rural life: flour, sugar, coffee, tools, fabric, ammunition. Caroline led him to a small table at the back, where she served him a simple but hearty meal of cornbread and bean soup. "You were there?" she asked quietly. "When David died?" James nodded. "He didn't suffer long. He spoke of all of you. Did he say anything?" Her voice caught slightly. "At the end?" James set down his spoon, choosing his words carefully. "He talked about a creek behind your house, said the water was so clear you could see to the bottom, that he used to fish there with your father." Caroline smiled sadly. "Cripple Creek. Pa taught us both to fish there before he died in the mine collapse back in '32. He studied James's. "Thank you for being with him, for not letting him die alone." "I made him a promise," said simply, "to bring his things home, to make sure his son knows who his father was. Grace will." Danny asks about his daddy all the she has. "How are you planning to get out to the home? It's a fair walk, and I notice you're favoring your left." "I'll manage," though the thought of a 3-mile hike through the hills made his injured leg throb. Caroline, "I finish up here at 4. My truck may not look like much, but it'll get us there." She rose from the table. "You can rest on the back porch till then. No sense in wearing yourself out before you even deliver your news." James wanted to protest, but found himself too weary to argue. The journey from Germany to had been long, not just in miles, but in the weight of memory and obligation. Perhaps a few hours' rest would do him good. The store's back porch overlooked a small vegetable, and beyond it, the rising slopes of pine-covered hills. James settled into a wooden chair, propping his aching leg on an empty. Despite his intention to remain alert, the combination of food, warmth, and the rhythmic sounds of the store lulled him into a light doze. He dreamed of Germany, of mud and blood and constant numbing fear, of Matthews telling jokes during artillery barrage to keep their spirits up, of the moment when Matthews pushed him into a ditch seconds before a mortar shell landed where he'd been standing. Soft pulling him back. James startled awake to find Caroline watching him with concern. The sun had shifted position. He'd been asleep for an hour. "Happens sometimes," he admitted, straightening. "Sorry. No need to apologize." She handed him a glass of water. "My father had nightmares after the Great War. Said they were just the mind's way of making sense of things no mind should have to make sense of." James drank the water gratefully. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was. Caroline glanced at her wristwatch. "Another hour and we can head out. Martha will want to fix you a proper dinner. You don't need to go to any trouble." "It's no trouble," she interrupted gently. "You brought a piece of David home. That means something here." When 4 o'clock came, Caroline closed the store and led James to an aging Ford pickup parked behind the building. The truck protested with a grinding noise when she started it, but settled into a steady rumble as they pulled onto the dirt road leading out of town. "Pine Ridge has seen better days," Caroline explained as they drove past abandoned storefront. "The big mine closed last year. Some men found work at smaller operations, but it's not the same. Many families have already left for factory jobs up north." "What about your family? You stay?" Caroline was quiet for navigating a particularly stretch of road. "Martha won't leave. This land has been in the family for generations. Grace is torn. She wants what's best for Danny, but this is the only home he's known." She glanced at James. "And me? I'm the telephone operator. I connect people. Hard to leave when you're the connection." The road climbed steadily, winding through dense forest before emerging onto a high ridge offering a sweeping view of the valley below. Caroline slowed the truck to a stop. "That's Pine Ridge," she said, gesturing to the small town, now visible in its entirety. "Not much, but it's home." Beyond the town, the mountains stretched blue and hazy to the horizon. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that reminded James why men like Matthews had fought so hard to return to. "I can see why David missed it," quietly. Caroline nodded. "He wrote about taking you fishing here someday, said you were a city boy who needed to learn what real living was about." The casual mention of a future that would never happen struck James like a physical blow. Matthews had planned for after, had believed they would both make it home. "We're nearly there," Caroline said after a moment, putting the truck back in gear, just over the next rise. The Matthews homestead appeared suddenly as they crested the hill, a white clapboard house with a wide front porch, a large vegetable garden to one side, and beyond it, the silvery ribbon of Cripple Creek winding through a stand of sycamores. Smoke rose from the chimney, and flowers bloomed in carefully tended beds along the walkway. As the truck rattled to a stop in the yard, the front door opened. A slender woman with dark hair stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. Behind her appeared an older woman, and, partially hidden behind her skirts, a small boy. Grace, Martha, the people Matthews had spoken of, was dying. This is it, Carolyn. Are you ready? James touched the packet in his jacket, feeling the weight of its content, not just paper and metal, but memories, love, final words, never spoken. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, and opened the truck door to fulfill the letters. Time seemed to slow as James climbed the worn wooden steps of the Matthews family porch. Each face before him held a fragment of David, Martha's steady gaze, Grace's determined chin, Danny's curious blue eyes. Mrs. Matthews, addressing the woman, I'm Lieutenant James Connor. I served with your son. Martha Matthews nodded once, her weathered hands clasped tightly before her. Caroline radioed ahead. Said you were with David at the end? Yes, ma'am. Come inside, Lieutenant, Grace spoke up, her voice softer than James had imagined. You've come a long way. The interior of the Matthews home was modest but immaculate. A stone fireplace dominated the main room. Family photographs lined the mantel, and handmade quilts draped over simple furniture. The scent of cooking filled the air. Something with apples and cinnamon. Sit, please. Martha gestured to a chair at the kitchen table. You'll stay for supper. It wasn't a question, and James didn't treat it as one. He lowered himself into the chair, grateful to take weight off his aching leg. Danny watched him from behind his mother's skirt, eyes wide with curiosity. Is that my daddy's uniform? The boy asked suddenly, pointing to the service pins on James's lapel. No, son, that's Lieutenant Connor's, Grace explained gently, but he wore one like it. Your daddy was very brave. One of the bravest men. The boy seemed to consider this, then asked, Did you see the tanks? A genuine smile. James's. Yes, I did. Your father drove one. This revelation clearly elevated David to heroic status in his son's eyes. Danny stepped forward, his shyness forgotten. Did it go really fast? Danny, Grace intervened, let the lieutenant catch his breath. Why don't you go wash up for supper? Once the boy had scampered off, James reached into his jacket and withdrew the oils. David asked me to bring these to you, he said, placing it on the table. Letters he wrote, his pocket, some photographs. Martha touched the packet with trembling fingers, but didn't. Was he in pest? Her voice steady, despite the grief evident. No, ma'am. It was quick. He spoke of home, of all of you. Grace turned away, busying herself at the stove. Caroline, who had been silently observing from the doorway, moved to help her. The army letter said he died a hero, Martha continued. Was that the truth, or just what they tell families? James met her eyes directly. Your son saved my life at Estonia, carried another man 3 miles through snow when he was wounded. The army doesn't say hero lightly, Mrs. Matthews. Martha nodded, satisfied. You'll tell Danny about his father when he's older. The real stories, not just the heroic ones, if you want me to. Good. Finality. A boy should know his father, even if only through others' memories. Supper was a simple but hearty meal. Fried chicken, potatoes, green beans from the garden, and apple cobbler for dessert. The conversation remained carefully distant from the war, focusing instead on the town, the coming harvest. Only after the meal, when Danny had been put to bed, did they finally open David's packet. They gathered around the kitchen table as Martha carefully unwrapped the oilskin. She handed each letter to its intended recipient, one to herself, one to Caroline, and one to Grace. The pocket watch she gave to James to hold for Danny until he's old enough to wind it properly. Silence fell as each woman read her letter privately. James stepped outside onto the porch to give them space with David's final word. The night air was cool and crisp, stars blazing overhead in a way he'd forgotten existed after years of blackouts and searchlight. Caroline joined him after a while, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. David wrote that you saved his life twice before he saved yours, he said, that you were the best officer he served under. James shook his head. He gave me too much credit. I doubt that. Caroline leaned against the porch railing. He also wrote that if anything happened to him, we should make you welcome. Said you had no family waiting. James looked away, uncomfortable with the accuracy of Matthews's assessment. His parents were long dead, no sibling. His fiancée had married another man during his second year overseas. David had been more perceptive than he'd realized. I have a hotel room in town. I'll head back in the morning. "Nonsense!" Martha's voice came from the doorway. "We've a spare room. You'll stay at least until Sunday." Again, not a question. James found himself nodding in agreement. Later, alone in David's old room, James sat on the edge of the narrow bed. The walls held faded pennants from high school football games, a framed photograph of David in his graduation cap and gown, a shelf of books about adventure and far-off places. He'd delivered the letters. He'd told the family about David's heroism. His promise was fulfilled. He could leave tomorrow with a clear conscience, return to Pennsylvania, and figure out what remained of his life now that the war was over. So why did the thought of leaving fill him with a strange emptiness? James removed his prosthesis, the metal and leather contraption that replaced his left leg below the knee, the result of that German artillery shell that Matthews hadn't quite saved him from completely. He massaged the scarred stump, a nightly ritual to ease the phantom pain that still plagued him. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Lieutenant?" It was Grace. "May I come in?" "Just a moment," he said, hastily covering his leg with a blanket. "Come in." She entered, carrying a small basin and towels. "Martha thought you might need these." "For your leg." James stared at her, startled. "How did you—" "My brother lost his arm in a mining accident," explained. "I recognized the signs of someone managing pain." She set the bed. "It's witch hazel and herbs. Martha's remedy helps with inflammation." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "In his letter, David asked me to trust you, said you were a man of your word." Her eyes met his. "I just wanted you to know that." After she left, James sat motionless for a long while. Then he reached for the basin and applied Martha's remedy to his aching limb. The cool liquid brought immediate relief, but it was Grace's words that truly eased something within him. Trust, a simple thing, yet so hard-won in a world torn apart by war. David had entrusted him with his final message. Now his family was extending that same trust, opening their home to a stranger because David had vouched for him. As James drifted toward sleep, he realized, in fulfilling his promise to David, he had unknowingly stepped into a new one, to be worthy of the trust this family had placed in him, though they hardly knew him. Tomorrow he would ask Martha if she needed help mending the sagging. It was a small thing, but a start. One day at a time, one promise kept leading to another return. 2 weeks stretched into a month, and October painted the Appalachian mountains brilliant hues of red and gold. James had fixed the sagging porch steps, repaired the leaking roof, and chopped enough firewood to last well into winter. Each task completed with quiet efficiency, each one another day of postponing his "You're good with tools for a history teacher," Martha observed one morning as James mended a broken chair on the porch. "My father was a carpenter," James. "He made sure I knew my way around a toolbox before I ever picked up a text." Martha nodded approvingly. Useful skills outlast fashion. It was perhaps the closest thing to a compliment received from the stoic matriarch, and James found himself unreasonably pleased. In the afternoons, he often took Danny fishing at Cripple Creek, teaching the boy to tie flies the way his own father had taught him. The child's initial wariness had melted away, replaced by eager questions about his father, about tanks and airplanes, about the world beyond Pine Ridge. "Did my daddy really catch a fish this big?" Danny asked one day, stretching his arms wide. "Well," James chuckled, "maybe not quite that big. But he did catch a German helmet once while fishing in a French stream." His widened. "A real helmet? With a German inside it?" "No, just the helmet," James assured him hastily. The German was long gone. These moments by the creek brought an unexpected peace. The war seemed distant here, as if the gentle gurgle of water over stones could wash away the memories of artillery and screams. James found himself sleeping better, the nightmares less frequent. He'd written to his former principal in Pennsylvania, explaining his delay in returning. The response had been understanding but firm. The position had been filled, the school year already underway. For the first time since arriving in Pine Ridge, James faced the question of what came next with no clear. The opportunity came unexpectedly over breakfast on a crisp Sunday morning. "Schools need a new teacher," Caroline announced, buttering a biscuit. Mrs. Lawson expecting, and her husband got work up in Cincinnati. "Middle of the school year is a tough time to find a replacement," Grace added, pouring coffee, "especially out here." James felt their eyes on him, but kept his attention on. "Good teachers are always in short supply. Seems to me," Martha said with characteristic directness, "that we have one sitting at this very table. I don't have a job to go back to, but I don't know if I'm ready to teach again." Grace's hand briefly touched his. The children here need someone who can show them there's a world beyond these mountains, someone who's seen it firsthand. Even the broken parts? Especially those, Martha. War doesn't stop at the mountain pass, Lieutenant. It follows men home. These children should understand that. Later that afternoon, James walked alone to the small cemetery behind the white steeple. A fresh marker stood among the weathered stones. David James Matthews, 1916 per 1945, beloved son, brother, husband, father, gave his life for freedom. James stood before it, feeling strangely as if he should report to his friend. They're doing well, Dave. Your boy asks about you every day. Grace is strong, just like they all are. The mountain wind rustled the trees, sending a shower of colored leaves spiraling down. I think I might stay a while. They need a teacher, and I need something, a purpose. He paused. I hope that's all right with you. No answer came except the wind, but James felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The promise he'd made in that muddy German field had been fulfilled, but something new had taken its place. Not an obligation, but a choice. The next morning, James went to the small building that served as Pine Ridge's school. 20 children ranging from 6 to 16 occupied the single room, their curious faces turning toward him. He entered, the school board chairman. Children, this is Mr. Connor, the chairman announced. He'll be taking over for Mrs. Lawson. Mr. Connor fought in the war, and before that was a teacher in Pennsylvania. I expect you all to show him proper. James surveyed the room, the worn desks, the outdated maps showing a world that no longer existed at the war, the eager and apprehensive faces, so different from his classroom in Pennsylvania, yet somehow familiar. Good morning, he began. I thought we might start by talking about maps and how the world has changed. By lunchtime, James had fielded dozens of questions, corrected the borders of Poland on the aging map, and explained how the United Nations would try to prevent another war. The children listened with rapt attention, particularly when he connected world events to their own community, how coal from Pine Ridge had powered factories, built tanks, how decisions made in far-off capitals determined which mine. Walking home that afternoon, James found Danny waiting for him swinging a stick at the imaginary foes. Ma says you're staying to be our teacher. That's right, James. Is that all right with you? Danny considered this with serious deliberation. Will you still take me fishing sometimes, of course, and tell me stories about my daddy? Whenever you want to hear them. Danny nodded, satisfied. Then it's all. He fell into step beside James. Ma smiles more since you came. Grandma, too, though she tries to hide it. James glanced down at the perceptive child, struck once again by how much he resembled David. Your father was my friend, he said simply. That makes all of you important. Are you going to marry my ma? Danny asked with child's directness. James nearly stumbled. That's not. We're just friends, Danny. The boy shrugged. Caroline says you look at ma the way Mr. Parker looked at Miss Aberneth, and they're getting married at Christmas. Heat rose in James's face. Had he been so transparent? He'd tried to keep his growing feelings for Grace carefully hidden, out of respect for David and for her grief. Sometimes grown-ups need time, he said carefully. Your mother loved your father very much. I know, Danny said, but she told Grandma that Daddy would want her. He looked up at James. Don't you want her to be happy? More than anything, James admitted. They walked in silence for a while, the crisp autumn air carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. Ahead, the Matthews house came into view, smoke curling from the chimney, Grace visible in the garden harvesting the last of the season's vegetables. I think you make her happy, Danny said, the child's certainty. That's good enough for me. As they approached the house, Grace looked up and waved. The late afternoon sun caught in her dark hair, and her smile, tentative but genuine, caused something to unfurl in James's chest. Not the sharp, painful longing he'd felt for home during the war, but something quieter and more enduring, a sense of arrival after a long journey. James had come to Pine Ridge to fulfill a promise to a dying. He'd never expected to find a new beginning, a chance to heal wounds both seen and unseen. Yet here it was, offered with a simple wave of a hand, with a boy's trust, with a community's acceptance. Race you to the house, Danny challenged suddenly, taking off. James watched him go, smiling at the boy's energy. Then, adjusting his stride to accommodate his prosthetic leg, he followed at his own pace. Not running, not rushing, but moving steadily forward, just as David would have wanted.